I think one of the interesting, more recent ones, and I don't want to say they're getting disrupted, but um, I think it was Hertz's decision to get rid of all the electric cars in their fleet.
I just read that. Yeah.
And, very good business decisions for that. You hear about customers coming up, they don't want an electric car, but that's all that's available to rent. And then you lead to bad customer experience. They're incredibly expensive to maintain. So, like, again, totally logical decisions for why Hertz would get rid of their electric cars. But it also kind of feels like baby out with the bathwater a little bit of like, is your only choice keep all of them or get rid of all of them? Or is there a way to kind of more strategically maintain a fleet in certain places until the electric car, until the infrastructure reaches critical mass?
Mm.
It doesn't have to be all or nothing. So I think it hasn't, we don't have an answer to how the story ends, but it was a decision that when I saw it was so drastic, I'm like, ooh, this is interesting. This could play
Hmm.
out in an extreme way.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating. We're seeing it happen in real time. Clarity is always easy when
Yep.
you're looking back and reflecting, but to see it happening in real time, I'm curious to see how it plays out. Um,
Yep.
I was reading another article about Toyota and electric vehicles even recently, and they, I think, have notoriously been late to the game. I think when it comes
Yep.
to full electronic or electric vehicles. But at the same time, I also read a separate article about innovation in battery technology, where now they have a proof of concept that can go 700 plus miles, right?
Yes.
So it's yeah, maybe, or Apple maybe is another one that's kind of let the dust settle a little bit before they enter a new market. So it's
Yep.
maybe
Of
hurts a little
course,
bit in inverse.
with their Vision Pro, which they aren't the first to come out with the VR headset, but
Right.
they just came out with the Vision Pro, and it's hilarious reading the reviews of, I think people are saying they can only wear it for 15 minutes before their neck gives out because
Oh
it's so
wow.
heavy. And one of the first accessories that a third party has come out with is a holster for the extra battery.
Wow.
Um, so, but I can also say that, we'll see that in probably 10, 15 years, maybe it'll be the norm. So things happen slow than fast, but there are little indicators of, kind of what Apple does of like watch what's going on and then pick your moment.
Sure, sure. Yeah, because especially with some of that augmented reality stuff, it could usurp their cell phone business, which is the biggest moneymaker
Right,
in history, probably of any product line.
right, right.
So yeah, that's fascinating. So I guess circling back,
Yeah.
you hit on leadership ultimately,
Mhm.
but at MileZero, you have this thing that you're calling like the ABCs. So I'm wondering if you can maybe explain that a little bit from MileZero's perspective or your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, as you can imagine, that has always kind of I don't want to say bothered me, but it's been a question I've struggled to answer is innovation has been out there talked about, a discipline, investment, all this stuff for decades now. I think the innovator's dilemma came out in 1997, and there have been some successes. But for the most part, the success rate of corporate innovation hasn't changed, despite the fact that we have decades of experience talking about it, studying it, et cetera. And so, why is that? And, I'm not going to claim that I have the answer. But one of the things I have noticed is that we tend to, and we being, consultants, experts, academics, and entrepreneurs, tend to talk about corporate innovation kind of in silos of like, oh, there's a process or there's a structure or, we need a training program or we need a culture of innovation. And the fact is, you need all those things. And so the ABCs stand for architecture, behavior, and culture. And all three of those things need to be worked on and developed and evolved at the same time, but in different ways over the course of the critical first 3 years of an innovation team. And so, yes, the architecture, the strategy, process, structure, metrics, all that's super important. That is where I have spent the vast majority of my career.
Hmm.
necessary but not sufficient for successful innovation. You also need behaviors and the leadership behaviors. And leaders need to engage in different ways with an innovation team than they do with their core business. So you need those things working together, and you need a culture around that within the organization that ideally is super supportive, but at the very least doesn't hinder or get in the way of innovation. You kind of need it neutral to supportive. So you really have to be monitoring all three of those things at any given time to have a chance of getting to that point where innovation is repeatable, sustainable, where you can have confidence in it.
I hope you're enjoying the first part of the show, and I want to invite you to check out another podcast from the Agile brand. It's called B2B Agility, and it's hosted by me, Greg Kihlstrom. The B2B Agility podcast looks at the factors that drive success in B2B marketing, with a focus on the people, processes, data, and platforms that make B2B brands stand out and thrive in a competitive marketplace. You can find B2B Agility on this podcast platform or wherever you normally listen. Before we get back to the show, I just wanted to remind you to hit the follow or subscribe button on your app to make sure you get notified when new episodes of the show are available. Now let's get back to the show.
So in your engagements, are you working with the same leadership team on all three of those elements, or do you end up, kind of working with individual groups on and prioritizing certain things with certain people?
We always start at different points.
Okay.
Every team kind of comes in with a different immediate need. And a lot of times, to be fair, teams, the first thing people gravitate to, understandably in business, all left brain thinkers, is we need a process. Or, we need a structure. And so it's a perfectly fine place to start. There's nothing wrong with starting there. It scratches the itch. It does set up, the things that you need for everyone to feel good about the fact that we're doing the right thing, we're approaching it in the right way. And then you start the conversation with leaders higher up, saying, okay, this is how you need to engage with the team. These are the kinds of questions that you need to ask. And you kind of start parallel pathing the behavior with the architecture.
Mm-hmm. I like that. And I what I'm hearing is this heightened focus on the architecture and the behavior piece. I know in past episodes, something I've talked about with other folks too, offline, obviously, is culture. It's something that's very easily grasped, but I would also argue that culture is almost a cop-out in some ways. It's this kind of ethereal thing, right? It's, a feeling more than I think what you're saying around process, around behavior, that's very tactical. And I almost think of the culture as an outcome of doing the first two things. Is that how you see it, or am I not understanding it correctly?
That is 100% how I see it. I think, culture is driven by behavior, by practice, by what you do. And people see what you're doing. They see you doing it repeatedly. So it becomes a habit and an expectation that then fosters beliefs that they have. So if they see you repeatedly investing in innovation and supporting innovation and rewarding things that quote unquote fail, that you learn from, they'll perceive that as, oh, innovation is important. This is a priority. And then you'll start building a culture of innovation. If they see what unfortunately happens at a lot of companies, of all sorts of grand statements about innovation is a priority, and then you hit a downturn and suddenly the innovation team is fired, that's not going to result in a culture of innovation.
Right. And I think, when people are excited about stuff, they're very vocal about that stuff. And I think when you're not exhibiting those behaviors or demonstrating that and sending positive signals, I often see, at least in my own experience, it just silences people. And that, then how do you even build the culture, right? When you're not even aware, or people are fearful of even voicing, how things could potentially be improved.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, that's the thing, as a leader, if everything you're talking about is this month, this quarter, the problems we have to solve, the fires we have to put out, that's what people are going to talk about as well.
Yeah. So I guess digging a little bit more into the behaviors, I'm really curious. What are some of those very specific behaviors you try to encourage leaders to take? And I know that looks a little bit differently. So maybe said another way, are there some common biases that you see leaders kind of fall victim to that you help navigate them through?
Yes. So the headline is, I tell leaders, I'm like, do the opposite of your instincts.
Okay.
Which is like the worst advice possible because that's so hard. They're successful, they're leaders because they have developed the right instincts over time. And to tell them to do the opposite of that, they're gonna be like, you've lost your mind. But I haven't yet.